The eland, Africa's largest antelope, made such an impression on the first men in southern Africa that they recorded it for posterity in their art. Thousands of years later, European explorers pushing into the wetter, more tropical parts of the subcontinent met their match with another, altogether more hostile large animal, the buffalo. Two heavyweights among Africa's ungulates, in other words, cloven-hoofed animals, the eland and the buffalo, belong to the same family and to closely related tribes. But over tens of thousands of years, each has become adapted to the needs and problems of a particular environment. Today, it's difficult for most of us to see how they can be related. But what is interesting is to see how nature has come up with different solutions to similar problems. In South Africa, buffalo are found mainly in the Kruger National Park and in other smaller parks and reserves around the country. The buffalo's preferred habitat is the humid riverine reed beds, and especially during the early morning and early evening when they need to drink. But they always live where there's plenty of grass, shade and water, which gives them everything they could ever want: food, shelter from the elements, and a means of keeping out of sight of predators. You'll waste your time looking for them in country where one of these vital elements is missing. Buffalo are herd animals, and herds of 500 to 600 are not uncommon in the Kruger Park. Often, though, only the animals on the periphery are seen, while the bulk of the herd stays hidden, like currants in a bun. Usually, the herd leader is a dominant cow, and though buffalo are not strictly territorial, she tends to keep them to their home turf, so they don't generally get mixed up with the clan next door. Eland are also a savanna species, but live in the less wooded areas. They're a lot less dependent on water than the buffalo, and can exist very well in much drier parts of the country. Their typical habitat is rich in grass, but despite this, eland are primarily browsers rather than grazers. Adult eland bulls can stand 1.7 meters or 5.5 feet at the shoulder. But there's great sexual dimorphism, which, before you jump to any wrong conclusions, means the males are a lot bigger than the females. Bull eland weigh up to 750 kilograms, but cows rarely go more than 2/3 of that. To the bushmen, or San as they're now known, the eland was the ultimate hunting prize, an animal of banquet size and mouth-watering taste. This, plus the fact that it's fairly docile, is why it's one of the few African wild animals that's been successfully domesticated. The eland is a typical hot climate animal, a mobile, self-contained air conditioning unit. The thin dewlap hanging under its neck is packed with blood vessels so that body heat can be radiated rapidly out to the air to keep its body temperature stable. And its fine, tight hair and light color act as an efficient solar reflector. Buffalo, on the other hand, need shade to help them control their body temperature. The bush offers them lots of cover, but in the contrary way of things, despite being surrounded by succulent leaves, they're primarily grazers. Buffalo are bulk feeders that have to spend up to 20 out of their 24 hours either feeding or ruminating. They have big mouths, big harvesters to mow grass in the sort of quantities they need. Nevertheless, they're selective grazers. Grass is gathered with the tongue, scythed by the lower incisors and swallowed whole. When they've collected enough, they lie down, generally during the heat of the day, relax and chew the cud. Buffalo are fairly self-assured. These are not animals that seem overly worried about being nailed by predators, though solitary bulls and calves are occasionally nabbed by lions. But on the whole, they seem to enjoy the security of living in a crowd. Yearlunt are a much more mix-and-match affair, with bull herds, cow herds and nursery herds splitting off and coming together again according to the season. They don't seem to be very territorial, and the hierarchy of the herds appears to be based on age and size. Animals on their own, and certainly calves, are liable to attack by lion, leopard or cheetah, and though they're mainly diurnal, which is the scientific way of saying they work day shift rather than night shift, yearlunt need to be on the alert around the clock. As they walk, yearlunt make a clicking sound that seems to come from their knees. Scientists don't know what purpose it serves, if any, but it may be a means for keeping in touch with one another. After weaning, yearlunt calves become increasingly independent and often get together in nursery herds. An yearlunt's head is the ideal shape for pushing into bushes and branches without getting caught. Raise the head to reach the leaves and the horns automatically tilt down out of the way so you can back out easily. Oh well, it's a great theory anyway. An yearlunt uses its lips to delicately select the leaves it wants and gently strips them off without damaging the branch and twigs. This apparent concern for the environment sometimes takes a knock when they start using their horns as food gathering tools and break branches off trees to get a tasty bite. In the drier parts of the country, the food supply tends to fluctuate with the seasons. In the dry winter months, when fresh leaves are off the menu, they'll turn to leftovers, or even switch to another restaurant completely and start grazing. Sometimes, if things get really bad, the small herds get together to form bigger groups, and there's a general exodus to search for food. But at any time, yearlunt are great hikers and travel far more widely than buffalo. In the more humid buffalo habitat, the supermarket shelves are almost always well stocked, so there's not a lot of reason for the animals to shop around. But in other respects, this environment is far more hostile in almost every way than that of the yearlunt. To start with, buffalo themselves, and especially old bulls, have a reputation for being crotchety, and if you ever come eye to eye in the bush with faces like these, you'll probably come to the conclusion, and pretty quickly too, that these are not animals that suffer fools gladly. Who knows but that their grumpiness is because they no longer have any marital rights. Younger, more virile bulls have pushed them out of the main herd, and they find themselves now in these small, celibate bachelor groups. Buffalo horns are clearly not the food-gathering implements of the yearlunt. These are cudgels for sorting out disputes over who's the boss, and generally mauling anything that threatens to spoil your day. The horns on an old bull can sometimes span 140 centimeters odd, or 4.5 feet for those of us that still only understand real measurements. This character could probably weigh in at around 800 kilograms, while cows can come pretty close to that. So there's not the great difference in size between the sexes that we see in the yearlunt. Calves are born in summer, when grass growth is at its peak, but nevertheless, many of them die, mainly from predation by lion and hyenas, or from diseases, and less than half of them reach maturity. But herd fertility is generally high, and populations recover rapidly, even after devastating diseases or droughts. Living in the long grass, buffalo are pestered by many parasites. Constant shaking and twitching and flapping their ears helps to keep the various annoying bugs on the move, and if the ears are ragged, it simply shows that this is not, on the whole, a very user-friendly environment. Buffalo bulls also wallow in the mud. This does a number of things. It cools them off, what in scientific jargon is called thermoregulation. It smothers the parasites, and it puts the buffaloes in the contracting business, making holes. All the mud they carry away helps to make the wallow bigger and more permanent, and a new timeshare amenity for the use of other, smaller citizens. Of course, on the downside, it also helps to spread diseases such as anthrax from waterhole to waterhole. The mud smothers most of the ticks, but for those difficult to get at spots, the cleaners drop in to do the tidying up. This is what scientists call symbiosis, when two species live side by side, with each profiting from the presence of the other. The buffalo gets rid of an itch in the back, the oxpeckers get lunch. The hot, humid Lowveld is akin to any one of our cities, a rich environment with a great carrying capacity, and buffalo, like us, have to learn to coexist with a whole range of neighbors. By comparison, the dry savanna is village living, a simpler ecosystem where the eland has to share his space with very few other animals. Two of Africa's largest ungulates, the eland and the buffalo, each in their own particular way, impressed themselves on the early human inhabitants of southern Africa. Two related species that evolved to meet the demands of very different environments. As nature's answer to the problems of survival in the African bush, there's a great deal more to impress us about these two African heavyweights than size alone.
Next to man himself, apes are the most intelligent land mammals, and because they have so many features similar to our own, people read all sorts of human emotions into their actions. So far as most of us are concerned, monkeys and baboons are good for a laugh, but to them, far from being funny, most of what they're about is simply to do with survival. Even their play is a rehearsal for things that will be important later: speed, agility, balance, ability to fight, and so forth. So let's have a look at the serious side of monkey business. Vervet monkeys and chacma baboons share more or less the same habitat. Monkeys tend to keep more to the trees because, being small, they need a refuge to retreat to when danger threatens. Baboons, on the other hand, by sheer numbers and because of their willingness to stand and fight in the face of a threat, are reasonably happy on the ground. Both monkeys and baboons share their habitat with all sorts of other life, so they have to be fairly ingenious at making a living, using their intellect to find and make use of many different sources of food. The eyes of both species are a striking feature, close together, looking in the same direction. Binocular vision, designed to give good distance judgment at short range, essential for when they have to leap around in the branches high above the ground. But the eyes are too close together for long-range work, so when they want to look at something far off, they have to move their eye base from side to side to get perspective. And if you're a small guy, it's restricting to be down on the ground rather than up in a tree. Not much difference between the hands and the feet. Vervets are the treetop version of a four-wheel drive vehicle, and they use both their driving systems almost equally. The fingernails and toenails are the monkey version of a lumberjack's spiked boots, something to get a good grip on the branches with. Monkeys have tremendous power-to-weight ratio. If we scaled them up to human terms, they'd be world record jumpers. But to them, the gymnastics are nothing special, just a standard part of their daily behavior. Life in the tops of trees is much like living on a series of islands separated by space. And for all the tightrope walking they have to do there, the long tail is an important piece of balancing equipment. But monkeys also move quite well on the ground, though the long tail here is really a bit of a hassle, like dragging a scarf along behind you for ticks and all sorts of other things to attach themselves to. There's no great difference in size between male and female monkeys. Theirs is not a society dominated by force. But baboons are a different thing altogether. The male chacma baboon is the powerhouse among African monkeys. This is a society ruled by threat. An indication of that is the baboon's teeth, which are far more elaborate than is needed for the kind of food he eats. They're actually weapons, slashing knives that can be used to inflict injury on any opponent. The male baboon's swaggering walk clearly means as much in baboon terms as it does among humans. It's aimed at browbeating the competition to keep out of his way. And if the advertising works and the rival is bluffed, it saves having to fight. In the Transvaal Lowveld, monkeys and baboons live in more or less the same areas and make their living in more or less the same way. So how did the monkeys survive? Well, quite literally, by living dangerously, by going to the outer limits, to the edge of the tree, the tip of the branch, to the places where baboons, even the little ones, can't possibly compete with them. For those times when a monkey has to put itself at risk to feed, and might be vulnerable to birds of prey, for example, or even leopards, nature has given it a set of pockets in the form of cheek pouches where it can store food. Sitting down to the job, so it can use both hands, speeds up the operation. Collect a lot of food quickly, store it in the pouches, and get back to a safe spot where you can sort out what you want in your own good time. Sometimes the way monkeys feed seems to be very wasteful, but it's really nature's way of providing a meal for whoever happens to be downstairs. Of course, small baboons can also get up into the trees, but there comes a time when growing size and weight make it all just a touch hairy. The big baboons have learned that the youngsters foraging aloft drop or knock a lot of useful food onto the ground, so they hang around to make the most of it. Baboons basically make their living by capitalizing on every opportunity that comes their way, constantly exploring for new sources of food and ways to gather it. This is how they've been able to adapt themselves to such a wide range of habitats in southern Africa. Day by day, they explore, taste, and experiment with new things, and they're quick to learn the tricks of the trade from one another. Here they've discovered food in a temporary pond, and what is interesting is that they're finding it by feel rather than by sight. Once again, being one of the smaller, lighter members of the troop gives you that slight extra reach over the adult. And, like the monkeys, cheek pouches are a handy pocket for hiding your spoils. Unfortunately, in national parks and nature reserves, both monkeys and baboons have discovered there's sometimes also a source of food in vehicles. The problem's not so much that the source is unreliable, but having learned from a single experience, they'll stay, quite unnaturally, at the same spot by the side of the road day after day, instead of being on the move over new ground all the time. As a result, they suffer a much higher concentration of internal parasites and disease than they normally would. So feeding them is a selfish rather than a kind-hearted act. Scratching is the classic monkey symbol. Grooming is a very positive adaptation to survival in the African bush, a way of getting rid of burrs and thorns and parasites, and of keeping your coat in good condition. And getting help from others strengthens social ties. It's well established that close bonds exist between animals that groom one another like this. And the groomer does get something for his trouble, in the way of grubs and grass seeds and so on. Among baboons, certainly, grooming is also a way of paying homage to the big guy, of flattering the boss, of getting near to him to enjoy his protection. You can also practice on the rest of your family, or start at an early age on Mom's tail. Part of the deal that goes hand in hand with having a large brain is slow physical development, and that requires a reasonably sheltered childhood for both monkeys and baboons. The babies are carried, pampered and nursed for a long time, so food gathering for them is not too serious, and they can afford the luxury of being able to fool around a bit. This is the time for play fighting, for sparring, and preparing for what, in later life, could be serious fights to establish a place in the hierarchy of the troop. At this early stage, it's all a bit uncoordinated. They can still make mistakes and get away with it, but later on, that slip could cost him his life. But Mom is never far away, so it's all still good for a laugh. But very soon, the fun will disappear out of it, and it'll become the serious business of just staying alive. The serious side of monkey business.
This is the calf of an animal that is rare in southern Africa. And this is the calf of one that is common. In nature, you'll never find these two animals together. And when you see either calf on its own, it's next to impossible to know which one it is you're looking at. Care to hazard a guess? Family likeness is one of the things that tells us that these two species are closely related. As recently as maybe 1.5 million years ago, which in evolutionary terms is virtually last week, the forebears of one of these animals broke away from the main stock and went south into more open country and a different climate. There they became genetically isolated from the original group and in time started to change. But they're still cousins under the skin, the same tribe and genus, not to be a stock, but quite different from one another in almost every way. The tsessebe, which is widely spread across southeastern Africa, but is rare in South Africa, and the blesbok, which occurs only in this country and is common. In South Africa, tsessebe are at the most southerly point of their range in Africa. They're found mainly in the Kruger National Park north of the Letaba River and in some small herds in surrounding private nature reserves. These are animals of the wooded savanna. They use the edge of the bush rather than the open grassland areas and enjoy the shade, although they seem to be able to stand a lot of heat. Tsessebe are basically short grass grazers, but if the long grass on the menu smells good, they're quite happy to give it a go. Grazers that behave like browsers. They're very fond of the grass that grows on high alkaline soils, and nowadays it's probably this as much as anything else that limits their range in South Africa. Blesbok, the southern cousins of the tsessebe, are animals of the Cape, Orange Free State and Transvaal Highveld. In times past, the large herds on the open grassveld made them an important food species for the early settlers. But today, they've declined to such an extent that they're found only in conservation areas and on a few farms, mostly within their natural habitat areas. Blesbok are sweet grass grazers, and the nourishing Themida rooigras of the grassveld savanna makes up the bulk of their diet. Generally, they graze it down to the ground, and sometimes out by the roots, which is why, if their numbers become excessive in the reserve, they can very quickly damage the veld. This is an environment virtually without trees or shade, where the summers are hot and the winters can be freezing. To cope with the heat, many open veld animals have white underparts to deflect the rays bounced up from the ground, and their longish hair and thick coat, what the scientists call the pelage, is a built-in filter against direct sunlight. In winter, when the energy demands are high and food is scarce, blesbok slow down their activity to a minimum to conserve what resources they have, and at this time they put on their winter woolly coats. As humans, we're taught to face danger rather than turn our backs on it, but many antelope do the opposite and look back over their shoulders at what is threatening. Maybe it makes them a confusing shape to the predator, and the mask-like design on the blesbok's head could well be camouflage. If that's expecting a lot with an animal that sticks out like a sore thumb on the veld, try seeing it through the eyes of the creatures around them. Predators are known to pinpoint their victims by first identifying where its head is. The white blaze on a blesbok's face, the bles in Afrikaans that gives it its name, breaks up the pattern so the head is no longer clearly outlined and so it doesn't become a target. This is called disruptive coloration. Today, of course, there are no large predators left where blesbok live, but it takes nature a lot longer than a few hundred years to modify an animal's looks and behavior to meet changed circumstances, and it still hasn't learned that the strategy doesn't work on a man with a gun. Tsessebe, on the other hand, live where natural predators are still a very real threat. Camouflage and flight are their two main defenses, but probably the best form of hiding is simply to keep still. Movement in nature is a giveaway, and if an animal stands still, it often just disappears to the eye. With tsessebe, going into the shade is more likely to be for concealment than cooling, but even when it's standing almost in the open, a comparatively large animal like this can sometimes be difficult to spot, and especially when the lighting conditions are in its favor. Tsessebe calves are well camouflaged, especially in grasslands. This is what the scientists call cryptic coloration, when an animal is able to melt into the background because its coloring resembles that of its surroundings. In this environment, where you can't see far, hearing and scent take over. Big ears generally mean that hearing is an important sense, and the patterns in the ears mark actual physical ridges that help the tsessebe to pinpoint the sound frequencies that are important to it. If you hear anything unusual, the rule is keep still till you identify what it is. But when the chips are done, the tsesebe's only real defense is to run, and if calves look out of proportion, it's because running requires having adequate legs. When they play, tsessebe calves, like any youngsters, are probably just having fun, but the serious side of their games is that it's also exercising their muscles to get them ready for a high-speed getaway. If the herd has to run, even the youngest animals will need to keep up. Otherwise, even if they don't actually get nailed then, they're likely to perish as a result of getting lost. Both tsessebe and blesbok have smallish eyes, a sensible idea if you spend a lot of time sticking your head into spiky grass. But nature has also given the tsessebe a set of safety goggles, eye whiskers, which enable it to feel when a grass stem that could do damage is getting too close to the eyeball. But the long face lets them keep their eyes above the grass while they carry on feeding, so they can peer over the rim of the dish, as it were, to keep a lookout for trouble. No one really knows why tsessebe dig their faces in the ground, but if humans use mud packs to sort out blemishes, tsessebe might be doing the same to get parasites out. The bushveld savanna is a heavy parasite environment, but on the whole, so far as external parasites go, tsessebe seem to get off lightly. Their short-haired, tight coats, an adaptation to the heat, are probably just very difficult for ticks and things to catch hold of. In the perverse way of things, the blesbok, living in a fairly low parasite environment, never seems to get a moment's peace. Their thicker, more open weave coats are an invitation to parasites, and they're pestered the whole time by biting flies and other irritations. All the shaking and stamping is a constant drain on their energy. At least nature has given the blesbok a cow-like tail to use as a fly switch. The other great energy drain, at least as far as the males are concerned, is the rutting season between March and May. For most of the year, blesbok are moderately territorial, with the boundaries between the herd areas fairly loosely defined. The ewes live as part of the general herd between the breeding seasons and move back and forth over their home range, following the flushes of grass. But with the onset of the breeding season, rams start to compete for territories, with the strongest, most virile animals taking over the best sites. From a ram's point of view, a good territory is probably one where he has a clear view of his rivals, but it'll also be one that has most of the things that the ewes will find attractive: position, food, shelter from the elements, and so on. Nice house, good view, close to the shops, it always gets them. And makes it easier to persuade them to stay until he's mated with them, in the face of all the come-ons from the lads next door. During the rut, the focal point of the ram's territory is the dung heap or midden. This is where he does most of the displaying, to try to convince other rams that he won't be an easy pushover. Rams also do boundary marking, including a complex ritual where scent from glands under their eyes is transferred first to grass stems and then brushed across the horns. Tsessebe go in for what looks like an identical exercise during their breeding season that starts in January. Unlike the freewheeling blesbok, tsessebe bulls have a permanent harem rather than one that has to be rounded up into their property and coerced to stay. So most of their displaying is ritual dominance stuff to show the cows who's the boss. Or else it's aimed at trespassers. If somebody does throw down the gauntlet, there's lots of challenging and sparring rather than serious fighting where either animal could be hurt. These animals wrote the book on body language, and the whole strategy is aimed at avoiding an actual physical fight. In the end, the animal that wins is probably the one that can keep the threats going the longest. As humans, we're in the dark about the subtle meanings of most of these territorial displays, and they're likely to remain a mystery. But it shouldn't worry us that we can't explain them. After all, we still go in for verbal threats, rude signs, and military parades to try to intimidate one another. Tsessebi were once found all across the northern Transvaal, northern Natal, and the northeastern Cape. Hunting severely reduced their numbers, and now, because of farming and other human developments, there are probably no more than 1,500 animals left in South Africa. But somewhere far back in Africa's past, a group of animals left the main stock and set their feet on a path to the south and into the high and sometimes chilly grass-felt savanna. Explorers and adventurers, perhaps, looking for fresh pastures? Or did they just get lost? Over countless centuries, their looks and behavior changed to meet the demands of their new environment and became what we know today as the blesbok. Through the eyes of the layman, adult blesbok and tsessebi are completely different to one another. But under the skin, and in their genetic code, the old links are still there. Once a year, when the calves are born, the ancient pedigree is revealed again. The baffling complexity of life is laid bare before our eyes once more, as an endless source of mystery and wonder. South Africa's national parks and nature reserves are typical of the broad spectrum of biological life that once extended across this country. The parks were set up to preserve cameos from the past and to conserve living systems for the future, but not even the largest of them is entirely self-regulating. The very act of setting them aside, of isolating them from their surroundings, introduces a host of man-made problems. And the smaller the park, the bigger those problems are, and the greater the need for human intervention to straighten things out again. Golden Gate Highlands National Park in the Eastern Orange Free State is a case in point. The park is more than 6,000 hectares in extent, but now and again a population build-up among some of its larger animals causes ecological problems. The black wildebeest is typical. The bulls are territorial and actively defend their chosen sites against all other adult males. This means they end up more or less spread out over the suitable breeding grounds, with the strong, healthy bulls on the large prime sites and the weaker animals pushed out into the less suitable areas, exactly the way nature intends it to be. But if the population in the park gets too big, young bulls are forced into places they wouldn't ever naturally go to, steep hillsides like this, for instance,
where their presence can start off erosion. In nature, antelope have a logical response to this kind of pressure. They simply up stakes and leave, migrate to an area where the competition is less. Since time immemorial, there's been no obstacle to doing this. But now the escape routes are blocked. The surrounding countryside is carved up into farms, and the result is that in producing food for ourselves, in attempting to ensure our own survival, we're now jeopardizing theirs. But if the name of the game's competition and we're winning, what's the problem? Well, quite simply, we may be winning in the short term with our highly bred crops and animals, but in the long run, if food shortages become acute, the genetic information in these antelope, the blueprint that enables them to produce good protein from what seems to us to be useless felt, may become vital to our survival. So there's a lot more to the business of wildlife management than aesthetics alone. Maintaining a healthy balance in the parks is an equally important part of our duty. The first step is to find out exactly how many animals there are and the makeup of the herds. On an ongoing basis, conservation staff go to Golden Gate's high points to do a count and a population breakdown, to determine the numbers of adults and youngsters, the ratio of males to females, and so on. All this information, put through the computer, reveals the population trends, and these, set against the state of the park's vegetation and the long-term weather cycles, help the ecologists to come up with estimates of what the park's carrying capacity should be for each species, in order to maintain a healthy balance. This year's figures indicate that Golden Gate can comfortably carry 325 blesbok, which means 164 will have to go. And there are 63 more black wildebeest than there should be. These excess animals will be captured and taken out of the park. When the helicopter arrives for the capture operation, the first job is an aerial census to confirm the numbers gathered in the ground count.
18 on Brett. 12 Elon. Go a bit left, Hugo.
It also gives a good idea of whereabouts in the park the animals are concentrated. This helps in deciding where to set out the capture bomas.
By the look of things, those paths are pretty well used. I think this would be a good site. Sure. There's a natural drainage line there. We can conceal the right-hand wing.
The trick is to site the capture corrals across the animals' natural paths, in places where the terrain will hide the wings of the boma from the incoming animals. And the whole thing has to be built quickly, because animals are wide awake to changes in their environment. Once the basic framework is in place, the sheeting is put up in the early morning while the air is calm. success of the whole operation now rests on the shoulders of just one man. In this case, Icho van Niekerk, the Parks Board's chief pilot. He has to read the topography and the natural routes in it, predict the reactions of the animals, both to the helicopter and the ground features, and blend it all with his flying skills, while he acts like an aerial sheepdog to drive the animals gently down from the heights and into the waiting wings of the capture net. To add to his problems, black wildebeest have minds of their own, and in the face of outside pressure, they're notoriously unpredictable. The pilot, by radio, gets the ground crew to spring the trap as soon as he sees the last animal is through. Then it's down into the main boma and a long breath-holding pause while the last little straggler gets in and the second curtain is up and the animals are caught. Over on the east side of the park, the next sortie gathers up a herd of blesbok. Initially, the group is far too large to handle in the boma, but on the way in, there are plenty of escapees. And once they realize they're cornered, it takes exceptional skill to get them into the boma. As soon as the inner curtain is drawn, the whole tempo is slowed down. A herd of blesbok like this is a very mixed bag, made up from many different family groups, and a breather gives them a chance to sort themselves out. Ideally, the animals should be loaded directly without handling. But more often than not, some sorting out has to be done, so they need to be calmed down with tranquilizers. While they're in the crush, rubber pipes are also put onto their horns to stop them hurting one another if conflicts develop. Fortunately, Golden Gate is free of any serious diseases, so there's no danger involved in taking animals out of the park. Even so, a veterinary clearance is necessary before they can actually be moved. The rest of the animals are put in a holding boma to await buyers or transport, and it's amazing how quickly they settle down and accept the artificial environment. When it comes to reducing the numbers of the park's real heavyweights, the eland, the capture corral technique is out of the question. Eland, the largest African antelope, are just too big to be handled while they're awake, so they have to be knocked out one by aerial darting with drugs. Once the dart is delivered, the animal goes progressively under the effect of the drug over a period of 5 minutes or so. While it's still aware of its surroundings, the chopper tries to steer it away from potential hazards, cliffs and streams and so on. But as it goes more deeply under sedation, it becomes totally oblivious to what's going on around it. This is the most dangerous time, because if it falls badly, it can choke. So the moment it goes down, the helicopter lands and someone gets in to lift the animal's head up. The idea is to get the earlant to the security of the holding boma before they come round. But sometimes, because of the differences in their weights and the resulting variations in the effect of the drug, an extra shot is needed to keep the animal under until it can be moved.
Okay. Okay, we just need to give him a little more.
Under the influence of the drug, an animal doesn't automatically close its eyes to avoid injury from sunlight or perhaps branches. That's why the cloth is placed around its head. There's usually a waiting list for earlant, so they spend very little time in the holding boma before being collected, which is perhaps just as well, because these males, standing more than 1,7 meters at the shoulder, would have no problem clearing a 2-meter fence if they put their minds to it. The females, weighing in at around 450 kilograms, are quite dainty by comparison. For most of the animals from Golden Gate, the journey to their new home is a short one, because it's Parks Board policy to try to relocate them on parks and farms within their former range. It's unusual for them to be sent further afield. So what has been achieved by all this expense and effort? Well, 3 things. In the first place, a man-made overpopulation problem at Golden Gate National Park has been tackled in a constructive way. The numbers of 3 species of antelope have been reduced to the point where those that remain now have enough room to move, to choose the sort of habitat they prefer to live in. Secondly, a way has been found to keep the excess animals alive, to spread the gene pool and the risk by re-establishing animals more widely within their former territories. And lastly, an ecological problem that we ourselves caused has been solved. And that's not only morally right, but it makes good survival sense for all of us in the long run.